Let's pray. God, we beseech thee, Almighty God, members of this honorable house, that they may wisely deliberate for the good of this country and for the glory of thy holy name. Join me in saying the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Pray be seated. This Parliament now convenes. Good morning to everyone. Last Friday, we sat here and had the presentation of revenue and expenditure for the period 2025, presented by the Minister for Finance, the Honorable Dennis Cornwall. And today we will have the budget presentations from other members of Parliament, beginning with the Leader of His Majesty Opposition. I now invite the Honorable Leader of His Majesty Opposition to make her contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today with a profound sense of duty and responsibility to deliver my maiden response to the 2025 estimates of revenue and expenditure in my capacity as Leader of His Majesty's Opposition. Mr. Speaker, I do not just see this as an opportunity to analyze figures presented by the government. I see this as an opportunity to advocate on behalf of the people of Grenada, Carriacou, and Pitimaki. Mr. Speaker, although I reserve my acknowledgments for the end of my presentation, it would be remiss of me not to thank God for His grace and His mercies that have kept me. Mr. Speaker, I stand here today drawing strength from the words of the psalmist David in Psalms 121, when he said, and I quote, "I will lift mine eyes to the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which make heaven and earth. The Lord shall preserve my going out and my coming in, from this time forth and even forevermore." Indeed, Mr. Speaker, it is with this faith in God that I embrace this opportunity entrusted me to I am also grateful, Mr. Speaker, to the father of this house, Dr. the Right Honorable Keith Mitchell, who has dedicated 40 years of distinguished service within the parliamentary walls. demonstrating, Mr. Speaker, an unwavering commitment to the people of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique. To my esteemed colleagues, the members from St. Mark and St. Andrew Northeast, I extend my heartfelt gratitude for the confidence you have placed in me and for your unwavering support on this journey. Your dedicated service and selflessness are sources of motivation for countless women and girls across Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique, and I say across the world. As we conclude and as the world concludes the celebration of International Women's Day, I emphasize the impact that they have on the world. Because you see, Mr. Speaker, under the new National Party's administration, Grenada gained international recognition, ranking as high as 6th in the world for women's representation in Parliament. Mr. Speaker, this is an achievement that is unmatched in the region, except for Cuba, which ranked 2nd. Mr. Speaker, after the 2022 general elections, Grenada fell to 64th in the world. I therefore called Mr. Speaker this morning for renewed efforts to advance gender equality and to strengthen women's participation in political representation in this country. Mr. Speaker, as we turn our attention to the 2025 budget that is before us today, I dare say it is a troubling picture. So, Speaker, never mind the nice words and all that has been said in the presentation last Friday. This budget is a narrative that has been woven with threads of incompetence, mismanagement, and self-interest. Mr. Speaker, this budget, which raises significant concerns about the stewardship of this country, must be dissected properly. Mr. Speaker, the mere fact that we are debating the 2025 budget almost at the end of the first quarter in 2025 is in itself a reflection of that incompetence that I spoke about. Mr. Speaker, I therefore want to register our very strong opposition to this government's unjustifiable delay in presenting this national budget, which should have been before this House traditionally December of 2024. Mr. Speaker, this is not a political issue. It is a matter of governance. It is a matter of efficiency. It's a matter of national stability. Mr. Speaker, the impact of Hurricane Beryl in 2024 was cited as the main reason for the delay in presenting this budget. Poor Beryl. Poor Beryl. Mr. Speaker, let us remember that the destruction of Hurricane Beryl, as the minister himself said, amounted to 16.5% of GDP, the damage done. We were fortunate, Mr. Speaker, that all of our major ports and government institutions remain intact. Furthermore, the government was not reliant on external aid to initiate recovery efforts. Let us remember, Mr. Speaker, only 14 days after the passage of Hurricane Beryl, Mr. Speaker, this government received a payout of $118 million from the CRIF Fund to start the recovery efforts. Mr. Speaker, might I remind us, a facility initiated by the new National Party administration. But, Mr. Speaker, on the subject of the CRIF payout, can we believe that after collecting $118 million, the Minister for Finance, Mr. Speaker, had the audacity to attack the previous government, falsely claiming that we decided to discontinue that facility. Mr. Speaker, instead of fabricating accusations, shouldn't the government be acknowledging the fact that they directly benefited from the very decisions that they now seek to discredit? Mr. Speaker, the $108 million they received after the passage of this hurricane would not have been possible had it not been for the vision, Mr. Speaker, and the actions of the new National Party administration. Mr. Speaker, every time this government speaks about CRIF, they should be saying thank you. Ungratefulness is worse than obeah. Mr. Speaker, how can we even begin to compare Hurricane Beryl's destruction and recovery with that of Hurricane Ivan? Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Finance, and I excuse him, he lived out of Grenada during the passage of Hurricane Ivan. Obviously, he would have missed the fact that Grenada sustained damages not 16.5% of GDP, 200%, Mr. Speaker. It is therefore lawless, or almost lawless in my opinion, to compare 16.5% with 200%. Mr. Speaker, let us just get serious for a moment. Mr. Speaker, given the immense scale of damages caused by Hurricane Ivan, the delay in presenting the budget was absolutely justified. The government had to secure international aid to start the recovery process. We had to reassess national priorities and finalize the national budget. There was no $118 million payout 14 days after. Mr. Speaker, in fact, there was no CRIF at that time. Mr. Speaker, the Treasury was not pregnant at that time either, Mr. Speaker, and we did not have a CBI program, so we did not have $1 billion in CBI revenue. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I remain uncomfortable, and it remains unacceptable, the lame reason that has been advanced for the late delayed presentation of the 2025 budget. Mr. Speaker, even with the extent of the damages of Ivan, the NNP administration, in a shorter time, was able to bring a budget to this House. But notwithstanding this today, Mr. Speaker, as we closely examine the allocations and priorities outlined in this budget, we must confront the harsh reality of missed opportunities, squandered potentials, overshadowed and narrowed interests. Mr. Speaker, the figures presented do not just merely represent cold numbers. They embody decisions that affect every aspect of our lives, from education and healthcare to infrastructure and economic sustainability. It is our duty, Mr. Speaker, to scrutinize these decisions rigorously and to illuminate the instances where short-sightedness and personal interests have prevailed over the common good and the common man. Mr. Speaker, the tale of the numbers within the estimates of revenue and expenditure starkly contrasts the very theme of a Grenada that is rising through prioritized investments in economic growth, youth development, and healthcare as advanced by this government. Economic governance. Mr. Speaker, this budget is being introduced at a pivotal moment when we are most confronted And we must confront, Mr. Speaker, the unyielding realities of our global landscape. We just have to turn on our televisions and understand what faces us. Mr. Speaker, the International Monetary Fund World Economic Outlook for 2025 anticipates a troubling contraction in global growth of 3.3%, which falls below the 20-year average of 3.7%. Mr. Speaker, you would not have heard this on Friday, but in Grenada, we have witnessed a sharp decline in our growth rate since this government took office, dropping from 6.4% in 2022 to a projected 3.9% in 2025, according to the IMF. You know, we quote the IMF conveniently. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, the current posture of the United States regarding trade, investment, and migration poses a significant threat to our revenue from the CBI program. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, it threatens to further escalate the cost of living for citizens of this country. Mr. Speaker, this very alarming situation demands bold, expansionary fiscal policies and strategies that would effectively channel funds into sectors essential for invigorating economic activities in Grenada. In other words, Mr. Speaker, we must heavily rely on capital projects, not recurrent expenses, capital projects. What was presented on Friday, Mr. Speaker, definitely, absolutely cannot achieve this. Mr. Speaker, this government, upon taking the reins of power in 2022, inherited a pregnant treasury, boasting of over 500 million in reserves and a primary balance surplus of 84.5 million, or 3.6% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, over the past 2.5 years, this administration has proudly proclaimed revenues from passport sales exceeding $1 billion, achieving, gloatingly, the highest passport revenue in 2 years in Grenada's history. Mr. Speaker, the amount generated in CBI and CBI revenues over this period, guess what, is more than what was generated in the lifetime of this program. Yet, Mr. Speaker, until now, almost 3 years after, not one single new investment project to show for the over $1 billion generated from CBI. Mr. Speaker, one would naturally assume that given the very solid fiscal foundation that this government inherited and the substantial revenue, the revenues derived from the sale of passports, financial constraints should not be an issue right now. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, you would expect that the capital investments that are required for this period to achieve the very objective of this budget can be done without any financial or fiscal challenges. Mr. Speaker, I'm getting to a very uncomfortable feeling that by the very action of this administration, we are being forced back to a position and a point in our previous history, Mr. Speaker, the previous NDC administration, when they were selling Grenadian assets to finance recurrent expenditure and to pay salaries. Now, Mr. Speaker, let us scrutinize. You see, it's not just about what the minister said, because you see, there's something that's more important than what he just said. It is what is in the budget document, Mr. Speaker. And it's not even just what's in the budget document, Mr. Speaker, it's the behavior of the administration, the posture of the administration Put that together with the figures and what was presented, and you get the true picture. Don't just listen to what he said. So let us scrutinize the estimate of revenue and expenditure to assess the harsh economic reality we currently face as a nation. Mr. Speaker, the government projects total revenue of approximately $1.265 billion against a staggering total expenditure of $1.602 billion, resulting, Mr. Speaker, in a deficit of $337 million. Mr. Speaker, where are we heading with this deficit, Mr. Speaker? We have moved from previous surpluses to a daunting deficit of $337 million. And it really doesn't matter, Mr. Speaker, how the Pierre representatives of this government explains a deficit. A deficit is what it is, a deficit. Mr. Speaker, this deficit, and he didn't say that either, this deficit does not include debt, which, if it is added, Mr. Speaker, will take us to over $776 million. He never said that. So who's paying the debt? Who's paying the interest on the debt, Mr. Speaker? As a matter of fact, you know, we spoke about suspending debt payments. Well, Mr. Speaker, you see there are children here and they need to understand. Suspending debt payments don't mean that all our debts are suspended. This is why, Mr. Speaker, if you check the document, the said government made allocation for payment of debt in 2026. So, Mr. Speaker, I am therefore not surprised that the government has brought a loan appropriation bill before this House, not for $50 million, if you want to be, you know, nice and say, well, after you take off what the minister said, they can draw down, and you're left with a $50 million deficit still. Mr. Speaker, they brought an appropriation bill before this House for $825 million. So, Mr. Speaker, it's either you have, let me rephrase that. Mr. Speaker, you have to be not serious. I don't want to say you might have a mental problem. You have to be not serious to know your situation and come here with a loan appropriation bill for $50 million. It is because you know your situation that you came with a loan appropriation bill for $825 million. Mr. Speaker, this situation is therefore unsustainable. Mr. Speaker, spending above your means is a dangerous place to be. We don't need no economists to tell us that. Mr. Speaker, the drone shows, that is why I say it's not just the numbers. You have to add the behavior to the numbers. So, Mr. Speaker, the drone shows, the fireworks, the galas, the traveling with large delegation continues to the extent, Mr. Speaker, that this government is budgeting almost 100% more for international travels in 2025 than in 2024. Mr. Speaker, this tells me that there is a lack of awareness of the seriousness of this situation and the situation facing this country. But maybe it can be an indication that the government just don't care. It has to be either an unawareness or a just don't care attitude of this government. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, I say, God help us. Mr. Speaker, I believe the Minister for Finance attempted to mislead the general public to believe that the government is financially capable of funding the budget from government deposits and that a loan is not necessary. Mr. Speaker, permit me. You know, Mr. Speaker, if everything was so hunky-dory, we have enough money, then why are we coming with a loan appropriation bill for that amount? And Mr. Speaker, why did we leave out the 700 million plus and did make no reference, Mr. Speaker, to that figure? It says, the loan appropriation bill, and I quote, an act to authorize the Minister of Finance. So that's what we did in the House. We authorize him, we give him permission to borrow from various sources the amount of $825 million. And listen what the bill before this House says. It didn't say for if needed. It says to finance the 2025 budget and the new hospital project. So it means somebody would have calculated, Mr. Speaker, what is needed, what is necessary to come to this conclusion. Because as I said, it could have been 50 million. It could have been 10 million. It could have been 100 million. 825 million. Mr. Speaker, this loan represents 51.5% of total expenditure. It means that over half, Mr. Speaker, of our budgeted expenses, including day-to-day operational costs, could be financed through loans. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Finance may be reluctant to tell us, but it is akin to taking out a loan to pay your utility bills, your water bills at home. The Hansard would therefore record this as the largest loan appropriation bill in Grenada's history. Mr. Speaker, when the new National Party administration exited office in 2022, the national debt stood at $2.1 billion. Since then, Mr. Speaker, between 2023 and 2024 alone, the government has already incurred an additional $132.2 million in debt. With this current trajectory, Mr. Speaker, less than 3 years, this government could, with a single stroke of a pen, drive our national debt to approximately $3 billion, a staggering 43% increase in just about half of a single term in government. Mr. Speaker, this raises profound concern about the future of our economy. It raises concern, Mr. Speaker, about future economic stability of our country. So, Mr. Speaker, the government is seeking an approval to borrow $825 million, more than half of our total budgeted expenses, reflect a staggering lack of fiscal responsibility, to put simply. This is not just borrowing, Mr. Speaker. It is an invitation to financial instability that will burden citizens for generations to come. These children here, Mr. Speaker, would have to bear the brunt. Some may argue, Mr. Speaker, that debt is not necessary, or debt is necessary for investment. We've heard them. It is necessary for investment in vital capital projects, and that affordability should guide our decision. Absolutely. I acknowledge this perspective, Mr. Speaker, as it supports my suggestion of an expansionary policy stance at this time. We need that. However, in this instance, Mr. Speaker, the funds are not being earmarked for just capital projects. They are also being directed towards financing the operation of the state. Particularly, Mr. Speaker, they would be used in areas of outsourcing of services for advisors, security services, travel expenses, and the like, despite, unfortunately, an inherited surplus of millions. Mr. Speaker, in what appears to be another glaring attempt to mislead the nation, the budget has an increased expenditure of $281.6 million, with only a mere $76.9 million, or 27%, being allocated for capital projects. while 207.5 million, or 73%, is associated with increase in recurrent expenditure. Mr. Speaker, this glaring imbalance exposes a fundamental misallocation of resources. It clearly illustrates, Mr. Speaker, the mismanagement and incompetence that defines this administration's approach to fiscal governance. But it also explains their posture and behavior. Mr. Speaker, the funds that should be earmarked for critical capital projects, these investments, Mr. Speaker, those investments which are essential for a nation's growth and development, are indeed, and instead of that, Mr. Speaker, they are squandered and will be used for financing day-to-day operations of the state. The government is yet to demonstrate, Mr. Speaker, to this nation, from the numbers, not from the fancy speech that we heard on Friday, from the numbers, that this budget is a so-called prioritization of economic growth and job creation. Mr. Speaker, there can be no serious economic growth and job creation when more will be spent on recurrent expenditure. That's just a fact. Didn't you find it strange, Mr. Speaker, that the budget presentation failed to list any new projects for 2025, if ever, maybe one, or to announce how many new jobs, Mr. Speaker, will be created? Mr. Speaker, outside of this administration, I don't remember listening to a budget that doesn't job creation and how many jobs would be created. The government cannot be serious about economic growth and job creation. Mr. Speaker, in just a short time in office, this administration has burdened future generation with an inflation of bureaucracy filled with high-paying jobs for the elites, while essential services such as education and public infrastructure remain woefully neglected. This is not merely a failure of budgeting. This is a failure of leadership, Mr. Speaker. By neglecting the fundamental investments that drives progress, this government is ensuring that future generation would inherit not just a mountain of debt, but also a diminished economic landscape, stifled by bureaucratic excess that prioritize the few over many. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, we will have limited fiscal flexibility to respond to any major economic shock. Mr. Speaker, to evaluate the government's specific priorities, we must look closer at the expenditure drivers and the extent to which social issues have been prioritized for spending in this budget. To this end, I therefore turn my attention to health care. Mr. Speaker, health care is not just a basic human right. It is the foundation of a resilient nation. I'm sure you've heard that before. Yet, Mr. Speaker, our healthcare system remains in crisis. After almost 3 years, Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Health admitted publicly that healthcare has not improved under this administration. Mr. Speaker, government admitted that nothing has improved since the last election. Mr. Speaker, Grenadians everywhere are agreeing that health care has gotten worse under this administration. What has happened, Mr. Speaker, to the transformation agenda that was supposed to be rolled out immediately from January 2023? Mr. Speaker, while the Prime Minister projects his plan for Grenada as the health capital of the Caribbean, Mr. Speaker, let me say this. This vision is definitely not manifested in the government's action. Mr. Speaker, in this budget, 2024, $122.89 million was allocated for healthcare, this important sector. Mr. Speaker, $24 million remain unspent. Interestingly, Mr. Speaker, the areas where allocations remain unspent were critical to the people, Mr. Speaker, namely medical supplies and materials, medical equipment, community health services, and funds for upgrading and refurbishing health facilities. Mr. Speaker, could you believe that the government has underspent in those areas? Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, our people are left to suffer. Medication is unaffordable, and essential supplies are no longer available at many government facilities, while $24 million allocated remain unspent. Mr. Speaker, the reverse holds true for the jet-setting Prime Minister's ministry. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's ministry overspent, not by 50,000, not by 100,000, by $2.1 million for international travel, hosting, and entertainment, far exceeding what was budgeted. Mr. Speaker, I question, is this a lack of prioritization? Is it incompetency? Is it mismanagement, Mr. Speaker? What is this? Over $2 million overspent on international travel, hosting, and entertainment. Mr. Speaker, while ministers of government and the political appointees travel the globe in first class, exceeding budgetary allocations, Mr. Speaker, the family of 2-year-old Kelvin, who has been lying in the hospital for almost 2 months, waiting for his family to raise the funds to take him overseas for medical attention. Don't choke. Where is the empathy for this child? Where is the empathy for Grenadians? Mr. Speaker, where is the government's intervention? The rising cost of medication only deepens the problem, with many unable to afford necessary quantities of medication, forcing them against doctors' orders to adjust their schedule just to make do. Over $2 million over the budget. One ministry, Mr. Speaker, international travel, hosting, and entertainment. Mr. Speaker, this is more reason why we need national health insurance after almost 3 years, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, NHI is geared at making healthcare more affordable and accessible to people. The fact that we are engaging in an elusive statutorization process where healthcare services are likely to be more costly and less accessible to our people, it is a major concern. Particularly, Mr. Speaker, for those among us who are less fortunate. Mr. Speaker, with the NHI contract terminated, we need a clear roadmap for this necessary facility. The Minister for Health said almost not except to tell us that it's cancelled. The contract has been cancelled. Mr. Speaker, under the NNP administration, significant work facilitated by the contractor. The Ministry of Health, and organizations such as the University of the West Indies. And so, Mr. Speaker, the NDC inherited, if nothing else, an excellent platform that it could have moved speedily on towards the implementation of NHI. I hear what? Well, Mr. Speaker, even if you inherited nothing, 3 years must have been enough time to begin and implement NHI in Grenada. You said you know how to do it and you come to do it. Get it done. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, we are not far from where we were almost 3 years ago. So today we have more questions than answers about this. Is there a new contractor? Was the contract signed? When will NHI be out of the pipeline? These are questions, Mr. Speaker, that we have. Mr. Speaker, how can we expect any real improvement in healthcare when the capital allocation in 2025 in this budget increased by $36 million? Great. But $31.5 million is allocated to the construction of a new hospital. You know, people clap, they clap that. The statutarization and transition projects in healthcare are all fitted in under this $31.5 million. Mr. Speaker, these monies are likely, in case we don't know, are likely to be used in soft cost for consultants and professional associates of the current administration. While at the same time, Mr. Speaker, the 2025 budget for medical supplies, listen to this, the budget for medical supplies, including medication, to be used in the hospital, cut by $10 million. How can we be serious, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, the government has refused to add not one medical item under the list of VAT exemption. One just has to check the consumer price index. Look at it. The cost of medication and food has been increasing consistently. I guess it is easier, Mr. Speaker, to increase the budget for international travel and large delegations than it is to add a medical item, amlodipine maybe, to the list of VAT exemption. Mr. Speaker, the notion that we are building a new hospital, the notion, Mr. Speaker, that a building would fix our health care problem highlight the cosmetic and superficial thinking of this very administration. Mr. Speaker, healthcare isn't about new buildings. It is about improved services, better staffing, consistent access to medication, improving affordability and accessibility. You could do that anywhere. We need a strengthened primary health care service now. That is what we need right now. Improve existing medical stations and enhance preventative health care services. That is what we need urgently. What will the construction of a new hospital mean for the average Grenadian in 2025? I wish somebody can answer that. What would it mean this year? People would die this year. What would it mean this year? Mr. Speaker, we're not talking, Mr. Speaker, private health care cannot wait on a new hospital. A new hospital that we don't know when construction would even start. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Finance gave us a hint. That's what we got on Friday, a hint that we should expect a groundbreaking ceremony to happen sometime in June 2026. And if we judge by the current rate at which projects are moving in the pipeline, then we can guess accurately, Mr. Speaker, that construction will not happen under the current administration. Mr. Speaker, he gave no date for the start, no date for the completion of this new hospital. Only 3D drawings, only videos. AI. Only the date for the groundbreaking ceremony was afforded us in this house on Friday. Mr. Speaker, it's difficult, and I empathize with people who cannot buy medication, who cannot pay for a doctor's visit, who are wishing that they would have had the NHI available. Mr. Speaker, it is difficult for someone to look forward to the groundbreaking in 2026 when they might have been waiting on a date for a surgery for 1 year now. What does the groundbreaking in 2026 mean to them now? Mr. Speaker, it is very difficult, Mr. Speaker, for someone to look forward to the groundbreaking ceremony for the new hospital in 2026 when they cannot get basic medication now in the government pharmacy. Mr. Speaker, 2026, this is great. If you ask me, do I support a new hospital? Yes, I do. But Mr. Speaker, 2026 is when this new hospital is expected to have groundbreaking. I am more concerned about the people I represent from Cafe and Crochet, Telescope, Marquis, who cannot purchase, Mr. Speaker, medication now and get an appointment in the hospital right now. I'm concerned about now to 2026. Let's talk about that a little more. Mr. Speaker, these persons cannot be excited about the groundbreaking in 2026 when they cannot afford to buy a month's supply of high blood pressure medication, baby aspirin for the health condition. It is a great idea. Let us get it done. But priority number one must be to fix the current system, Mr. Speaker. After promising all contract workers permanent employment after 12 months of assuming office, Mr. Speaker, to date, staffing remains a major issue in the health sector. In 2023, Mr. Speaker, the government's approach was to give all nurses a monthly taxed honorarium, quite different to what they did for themselves. While this will continue in 2025, we notice a $7.1 million cut in compensation for healthcare workers. Mr. Speaker, who are these healthcare workers that would be affected? Mr. Speaker, we must address healthcare workers' retention and morale before we continue to gallivant about the hospital that groundbreaking will take place in 2026. All these need to be urgently addressed, Mr. Speaker, before we celebrate groundbreaking. Mr. Speaker, will this be, and I'm wondering, will this be another election gimmick based on utterances from members of the inner circle? This election promised to be completed in this term, and from the pronouncements made on Friday, Mr. Speaker, I call this yet another broken promise of this administration. Mr. Speaker, this government promised to transform healthcare. After 3 years, we should be at a turning point, an opportunity to fix the systemic issues plaguing healthcare. Yet this budget fails to adequately invest in the areas that would enable our healthcare system to function effectively. We're cutting where there's a necessity. Mr. Speaker, although the government had admitted that healthcare is not better today than it was in 2022, I suspect, Mr. Speaker, I suspect the rebuttal today will be the great mantra. NNP has been there for 23 years. That's the way leaders respond when they fail to deliver. If this government was performing, they would not even mention the New National Party. But it's the escape route that leaders use when they fail to deliver. They find a scapegoat, enemy, burial, anything, anyone, blame somebody. Mr. Speaker, listen carefully over the coming days and prove me wrong. Mrs. We cannot afford to ignore the reality that our healthcare sector is in crisis. It's worse than it was in 2022. And that almost 3 years is enough time to show some turnaround in this sector. We are being reasonable. Almost 3 years. You cannot be saying it is worse. There is a need, Mr. Speaker, therefore, for urgent action. And this budget must move beyond rhetorics and deliver real solution to the challenges that we face in healthcare. That's what you promise. Invest where it matters. Prioritize your spending, settle down, reduce race, reduce travels, and deliver with empathy for the people of Grenada, Carriacou, and Peterman. Mr. Speaker, we are yet to see the prioritization of youth development beyond the cheap rhetoric. Youth development, where are the opportunities? Mr. Speaker, our young people are not short on ambition, talent, and drive. What they lack are real opportunities. When we examine the youth development program in this budget, Mr. Speaker, what I see is a lack of significant programs beyond what was inherited from the NNP administration to truly uplift and empower our young people. You see, you came to make things better. You came to fix what NNP couldn't fix. You came to swing a magic wand to get things through the pipeline. Mr. Speaker, this government has touted. This government has a youthful government. You would think youth would stand for youth. Yet this budget does not reflect the reality that young people face on a daily basis. What bold, transformative initiatives that will genuinely equip young people with the skills and the support that they need to thrive. The Emmalin program, Mr. Speaker, that was chastised for years by this administration. A cut of $8 million recorded in this budget. $8 million. After 3 years, Mr. Speaker, almost 3 years, not a single new person was added to this program. Almost 3 years later, Mr. Speaker, no new program, no serious restructuring of that inherited program. What is this saying? Mr. Speaker, what has happened? The promise made to Imanis, we will make you permanent as soon as we get into office. Mr. Speaker, that is what we are interested in. Instead, Mr. Speaker, many of them were sent home, and now an $8 million cut in this program. Under the New National Party administration, there was a clear pathway and a policy position as it relates to permanent employment of IMA trainees. Mr. Speaker, while the government congratulates itself on the 2 new initiatives, Elevator and Enterprise-Based Training Program, Mr. Speaker, note that the budgeted amount is $2 million and $1 million respectively. They fail to acknowledge that this program, funded under the GIP program, an NNP initiative, Mr. Speaker, only accounting for $3 million. While at the same time, you're introducing 3, but you are butchering $8 million off of one program that you inherited. Are we really serious, Mr. Speaker? What is the investment? Mr. Speaker, we have thousands of young Grenadians who are unemployed, underemployed, disillusioned. What about those at risk? Those in rural areas, those struggling with poverty, and those left behind by a system that is supposed to support them. Mr. Speaker, the government's antics in 2025 are not surprising. Data from the programs for youth development in 2024, as presented, highlights, Mr. Speaker, serious incompetence. Less than 50% of the Empower Program fund in 2024 was spent. How can we claim to care about at-risk young men when the very program meant to uplift them remain underfunded and underutilized in 2024? What justification can be given for failing to invest in our youth while millions are spent in traveling internationally, hosting parties, entertainment, Mr. Speaker? No justification. As a matter of fact, that budget, Mr. Speaker, I referenced there, $3 million, is not very far down the road from the added $2 million spent by the Prime Minister's office in overseas travel, hosting and entertainment. We cannot be serious, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of this administration attacked the Empower program. They promised a better program. Today, the same NNP program was relaunched, even the same name. No major changes were made after the program was suspended for a long time. That was the most noticeable thing, the long suspension of this program. So many young men who are expecting a so-called transformational project are left disappointed, and I say today, less progress is being made in this program than was made in 2022. Beyond employment programs, where is the focus on education, mentorship, and rehabilitation? We have students dropping out due to lack of support, rising gambling and disruptive behaviors in institutions, and young people disengaged from education and training. The lack of foresight in policy implementation has created major barriers rather than opportunities. If we are serious, Mr. Speaker, about building a resilient Grenada, as the theme suggests, we must be serious, more serious, far more serious about investing in our young people. Not just words, but with meaningful actions. Put your money where your mouth is. You can't be adding 3 and cutting out 8. Something is wrong with that. Where's your math? Mr. Speaker, these young people deserve better. They deserve the promises that were made. Get rid of NNP. We're coming to make life better. In the stroke of a pen, with the stroke of a pen, within 12 months. They deserve a government that recognizes their struggles and is willing to act. Mr. Speaker, education. Education is the backdrop and the bedrock upon which any resilient nation is built. Yet our education sector faces systemic challenges that have only worsened. Education is not just an expense, it is an investment in human capital, economic growth, and social development. That is why, Mr. Speaker, in the last budget, I appeal to the government to review the free tuition for all. Mr. Speaker, the free tuition for all policy, and consider, this was my advice, who's me to advise? I said, consider providing assistance for transportation and other necessities so that students who need additional support could truly benefit from the free tuition for all policy. I wasn't condemning the free tuition for all. I said, let us provide more support so that people can take more advantage of this program, greater advantage. Mr. Speaker, when the NNP administration implemented a free tuition for needy students, we recognize that financial barriers went beyond tuition. We ensured that students who needed extra help with transportation, uniform, tools, and resources received it. But instead of listening and responding with care, this government brushed aside the realities of struggling families and defended its policy without question. Interestingly, Mr. Speaker, there is a 50% cut in this program in 2025. Mr. Speaker, is this about helping people, or is this about ticking off a box to say, yes, we implemented free tuition? Who's benefited? Why are we cutting a program like this by 50%? Who's fooling who? Mr. Speaker, today, despite free tuition, and not just free tuition, I spoke about it too, the raising or the increasing of the compulsory school age. In spite of that, so we say you must go back, you must continue school till you're 18. We say you're getting free tuition, go to school. Man, you would have expected, Mr. Speaker, that term CC will not be able to accommodate the upsurge in applicants and students attending. Mr. Speaker, to the contrary, despite free tuition and an increase in the compulsory school age, enrollment at term CC has dropped and attrition rates have surged. Check it. This is confirmed by the government numbers for 2024 also. Only 26% of the 2024 budget for free tuition was spent. That tells something. Parents simply cannot afford the hidden cost, transportation, meals, and supplies. And what has been the government response? Doesn't care. We already ticked that box. Social development, a government devoid of empathy. Mr. Speaker, social development should be the heartbeat of any responsible government. And I said before, don't waste time talking about us. You came to do it better. You came to fix all the things we couldn't fix. Go right ahead. You have our full support. Ensuring that the most vulnerable among us are protected and uplifted. However, this administration has demonstrated a disturbing lack of empathy for the struggles of the ordinary Grenadians. Their failure to deliver on critical housing and social welfare programs have left thousands in hardship. Housing is not a luxury. It is a basic human need. Yet, Mr. Speaker, the current situation, particularly for the people of Carriacou and Martinique, is indeed alarming. Mr. Speaker, the government's handling of housing projects has been nothing short of disgraceful. Nothing short of disgraceful. In a strange turn of events, 50 to 100 homes were supposed to be handed over to victims of Hurricane Beryl by December 2024. I'm going with the numbers, Mr. Speaker. So when I say disgraceful, that is. However, what is disgraceful, Mr. Speaker, is not one bareback house was delivered then in 2024 December. 9 months, Mr. Speaker, after, families remain under tents, enduring unbearable conditions, while the government moves at snail pace. not at all bothered, traveling the globe, $2+ million, 2 point something million overspent. So I'm not talking about what was budgeted, overspent, international travel, hosting and entertainment in one ministry, Mr. Speaker. Look at what has happened. No one, Mr. Speaker, should boast about handing over 3. Come on, get real. No one should boast about handing over 3 houses out of 100 built-back houses. No one. It is disgraceful, Mr. Speaker. The intervention of Hands That Saved from Trinidad was a blessing. Providing shelter to some 27 families in Carriacou, even though not one house was delivered to the people of Carriacou and Pitimatnik under the Build Back Better houses. Carriacou, Pitimatnik, and the northern parts or southern parts of Grenada. The government, at the same time, all that being the case, has recorded an expenditure, interestingly, of over $26 million for the building back of houses in 2024. Where? What do we have to show? You know, the Minister for Finance said, the former minister was head of ICT in the region. What do we have to show for this? So what do we have to show for the $26 million that was spent on housing in 2024? Where did that money go? Moreover, Mr. Speaker, the incentives given on furnishing have come to an end at a time where most people are still without shelter, and the cost of furnishing has increased according to the own government consumer price index numbers. How can any caring government, Mr. Speaker, be armed with such information and cease the concession to the people in a time like this? Mr. Speaker, you know, the government also promised to build 500. That is why I said this housing thing, it's painfully disgraceful. 500 Grenadian-style homes every year. Almost 3 years, Mr. Speaker, later, when we should have 1,500 houses completed, not one have been completed. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, hundreds of empty Chinese-built homes stand as a painful reminder of the broken promises and the misplaced priorities of this government. Mr. Speaker, this budget offers little hope as it relates to housing. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, 1,500 Grenadian-style houses. The government boasts, full credit, 14 houses under construction. You know, I've never expressed this before, but I'll express it now. I have a strong feeling that the one reason for this late, delayed budget is to give the government time to start a few projects like these to say that we have started. Who is fooling who, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, the Chinese-built apartments were donated by the government and people of China for low-income families. Yet, Mr. Speaker, many of these units remain unoccupied. Who are the real beneficiaries? Mr. Speaker, reports suggest that most of the units were sold. Official report presented. Most of the units were sold. Mr. Speaker, the question therefore is, sold to whom? Are there Grenadians in need? Well, if they were, then they would be occupying them now. Are they first-time owners? Or has this government commercialized a humanitarian project, shutting out the very people that it was meant to help? Is distribution based on who you voted for? Where is the empathy, Mr. Speaker? Where is the heart for the people? Mr. Speaker, the SEED program is supposed to be a safety net program for the most vulnerable. Yet many qualified individuals are being denied assistance, not because they don't meet the criteria, Mr. Speaker, but because of political discrimination. Mr. Speaker, I often wondered why my constituency, others have reported the same experience, why some officers acted with such hostility towards those who are perceived to be supporters of NNP applying for this program. But Mr. Speaker, when I heard the Prime Minister at the recent convention rally saying, and I quote, "We need to know that all of us belong to the National Democratic Congress. So we can't just fight for what I go get." When you know, or when you don't know who the people are, sometimes the reason the other side is getting it is because we're not saying who are the real NDC people. Mr. Speaker, thank you. It is much clearer now. Why so many people are denied the support that they genuinely need? It is the philosophy of this administration. Mr. Speaker, we need a Grenada for all. A Grenada where people can thrive regardless of their political affiliation, regardless of their religion, regardless of their social class. Mr. Speaker, let us move forward together, not backward. Mr. Speaker, beneficiaries of any government program should be selected based on need, not political affiliation or party loyalty. What are we encouraging?
That's all, Honorable. That's all. I said it on Friday. I'm going to say it again. Please have your phones turned off or have them on vibrate. You should not disturb the speaker on the floor. Please, Honorable. Proceed.
Okay, so may I try to get my trend of thought back? Mr. Speaker, as I said, beneficiaries of any government program should be selected on need, not political affiliation, not party loyalty. Mr. Speaker, the question must be asked, should a struggling mother, an unemployed father, or an elderly citizen have to pledge allegiance to a political party just to receive basic assistance? So, Speaker, that is what the current administration said. That was the promise to the people. Vote for us, doesn't matter whether you're NNP or NDC, you will benefit. This is not just unfair, Mr. Speaker, it is heartless, in my opinion. Agriculture and food security, a government that actually doesn't care about farmers, fishermen, and others. Mr. Speaker, and I actually hate the fact that I have to speak to this when the Minister for Agriculture is from the food basket Grenada, is from St. Andrew, my brother. But I have to speak, Mr. Speaker, on what the budget document said, not to the minister. Mr. Speaker, the current administration has inflicted what I consider to be the greatest blow to the agricultural and food production sector in the shortest period in this country's history. Prepare to hear, maybe today, about the chickens and the goats that were distributed. But Mr. Speaker, yeah, prepare to hear about that, no problem. We all anticipating whether the chickens were dead or alive. Let's prepare to hear about it today. Mr. Speaker, but I'm not really interested about the chickens and the goats. Mr. Speaker, I am more interested in hearing about the sustainability of the agriculture sector and the real strategies to deal with a food security crisis that is facing this country? What is the plan to revive the rural economy through agriculture? What is the plan that you had to expand the brain of the ministry by pulling in technical support and advice from individuals who are knowledgeable, experienced, and passionate about agriculture? So many of them are outside. So many of them are outside, not having an opportunity to use their skills and their resources. Mr. Speaker, let us go back to the Minister of Finance 2024 budget presentation when he spoke so eloquently. Yeah, I have a little empathy for him. He did speak eloquently, Mr. Speaker, on food security enhancement project. Yeah, let's redefine that word for today. Hear what the minister said in 2024. He said this $27 million World Bank supported project will provide direct support to farmers and fisherfolk, thereby reducing reliance on food imports and cutting food costs. Key components include increasing production support for crops, livestock, poultry, and fisheries, providing equipment and training, promoting sustainable agricultural practices, establishing central storage centers, and improving farm road access. An amount of $9 million has been allocated for this project. Now, this was in 2024. And that is why I say be careful with the words that are spoken in those speeches, because they do not go very much further than this room. Mr. Speaker, we have to be so careful when we listen to these speeches. What we choose to believe, Mr. Speaker, we should filter what we believe. To the contrary, Mr. Speaker, the Central Statistics Office, their database shows that Grenada's food exports in 2024 fell in value by 37% over 2023. This, in part, Mr. Speaker, was as a result of reduced domestic production and, to a lesser extent, lower export prices for just a few commodities. So what was done in 2024 was supposed to increase production. So let's see what happens. Mr. Speaker, we are yet to see the central storage centers, and farmers themselves have reported that not 1 mile of farm road has been improved, while they experience mounting incidences of predial larceny. They are saying that they cannot see the farm roads. Farmers, fishermen, vendors are frustrated, and they are still awaiting much needed support. There is an urgent need for strategic action, not activities, not distribution of things and photo ops, real strategic direction and action in the Ministry of Agriculture. And the leadership of this country must take responsibility for setting the tone as it relates to agriculture. Mr. Speaker, the medium-term economic and fiscal strategy report submitted before this House, along with the 2025 estimates of revenue and expenditure, informs of an average drop in agriculture production in Grenada by 25.3%. As food prices soar, families struggle to afford basic goods, and we would expect this budget to prioritize, really prioritize agriculture and food security beyond verbosity. And you're going to hear a lot of that today and tomorrow. All these words, Mr. Speaker, while farmers who are the backbone of this nation are left abandoned. That's how they say that they feel, not my words, their words. The numbers do not lie, Mr. Speaker. A total of $67.3 million was budgeted for agriculture in 2024. Mr. Speaker, $26 million remain unspent in that ministry. Mr. Speaker, in 2025, the overall budget for agriculture is cut by approximately $30 million. And I ask, is this incompetence or is this neglect for the farmers and fishermen of this country? How do you justify cutting the budget for a productive sector that has been suffering for year-on-year declines? Sadly, Mr. Speaker, many of the capital projects and programs that could assist the country to satisfy the mission statement of the Ministry of Agriculture would not be funded in 2025. Mr. Speaker, the government has no issue with spending on international travel and consultancy. But when it comes, yes, again, I need to remind you, because I need you to change. I need you to change that. That's why I'm reminding you. I need you to change. Too much travel. Yes, it must sink in. But when it comes, so you are very comfortable overspending on international travels. But when it comes to farm roads, Mr. Speaker, $312,674 of the $1 million that was allocated was spent on farm roads. Let's overspend on some farm roads, Mr. Speaker. Imagine this. While farmers struggle to access their own lands, government officials travel regularly around the world, first class and in comfort. Where is the priority? What is the point in increasing budget numbers? So I'm not listening to any numbers today, Mr. Speaker. What's the point? Increasing budget numbers and it remains unspent. It is nothing more, Mr. Speaker, than deception on paper, a strategy to create an illusion of investment without actual commitment to the people. Mr. Speaker, the underperformance continues across almost every agricultural initiative. Of the $2 million allocated to boost the poultry sector, imagine this, Mr. Speaker, less than half, $873,580 was spent. Why poultry farmers cry out for basic support? What is even worse, Mr. Speaker, in 2025, the budget for this area, you would not believe this, was cut by 50%. How in good conscience, Mr. Speaker, could this be acceptable? Is this a special initiative to completely destroy or kill the poultry sector? What is this? What is this, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, the Consumer Price Index recorded price increases not just for food and medication, but guess what? It attributes some increases to an increase in the price for poultry, pork, and preserved fish. Mr. Speaker, what is the plan? What is the strategy to provide more support for farmers and fishermen? So, Speaker, let us talk about youth in agriculture, an area critical to the future of food security. Mr. Speaker, of the $1.65 million allocated, only $414,569 was spent. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, in 2025, the allocation for this program was also reduced. Mr. Speaker, I know you don't like to, I know they don't like to hear it, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you don't have a problem. Mr. Speaker, while we are increasing the cost of travel, we are cutting the cost to support agriculture. Mr. Speaker, we are cutting allocations for critical productive sectors like agriculture. What happened to the government's pledge to encourage young farmers, to support young farmers, to invest the youth in agriculture, to transform the agriculture sector? What happened to that? Is it this yet another case of lip service with no real action? How can we take anything that you say between today and tomorrow serious? At least I won't. I don't know about anybody else. I won't. Mr. Speaker, and the most glaring failure, Mr. Speaker, is the allocation for sargassum seaweed. Mr. Speaker, I am from an area where the stench, the effects, Mr. Speaker, I've searched, couldn't find, I've searched all over, couldn't find anywhere where somebody can show me what was spent in this area. But I'm not so concerned about what was spent in that area. I am more concerned, Mr. Speaker, where is the promised net to collect the seaweed before they come to shore? I'm more concerned about that, Mr. Speaker. Where are the solutions for fishermen whose livelihood are being destroyed by this very crisis? Little or no action in that area. That is why I say I'm not so concerned about the speech. The document, get document, 800 plus pages. That's what the action of this budget is, Mr. Speaker. Not in the speech. An hour and 30 minutes, 35 minutes. That's not it. The document, 800 plus pages. That's what's most important. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to climate resilience, the situation is no different. Of the $4.4 million budgeted for climate resilience agriculture, for integrated landscape management, doesn't appear that we've spent there. Even in a year, Mr. Speaker, where food security is such a serious threat. I mean, how could this be? Of the $9.1 million budgeted for food security, let me just say this again, $9.1 million budgeted for food security, only $359,000 was spent. How does the government justify this? Mr. Speaker, the new MNIB Marketing and National Importing Board was supposed to be fully operational by June 2024. Today, there are more questions than answers. While the farmers continue to struggle with market access, last Friday, the minister told us that they are expecting a new entity that will replace MNIB to be up and running closer to the end of the year. Not sure if to believe or not to believe. Farmers are running out of patience. Almost 3 years. To make matters worse, Mr. Speaker, in a time of food security challenges, when farmers are struggling, instead of supporting local production, Mr. Speaker, government has been allowing businesses to import items that are already being grown by local farmers, undermining their ability to compete. How can this be justified, especially now with the food security crisis that faces us? Mr. Speaker, food security is not just an economic issue, it's also a matter of national security. Without a strong, well-supported agriculture sector, we are at the mercy of external shocks. We are at the mercy of external shocks. Yet, Mr. Speaker, this government treats farmers as an afterthought, it appears, looking at the numbers. Not what is said, the numbers. Failure to deliver on promises, failing to invest in infrastructure, and failing to prioritize local production. Mr. Speaker, if we are truly serious about resilience, then agriculture must be a national priority. Must be a national priority. But based on the budget, Mr. Speaker, only one thing is clear. This government does not care about farmers or food security or the future of the agriculture sector as they care about themselves. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to make excuses. Everything under the sun is the reason for non-performance. If the excuse is not NNP has been there for 23 years, then the excuse is we've just been there for 3 years. Has to be one of them. Mr. Speaker, until now, some bona fide farmers are yet to receive support after experiencing the ravages of Hurricane Beryl. Farmers have reported that some individuals who are not farmers, in one case someone who buys from farmers to sell, receive grant funding from the Ministry of Agriculture for damage of their farms. Mr. Speaker, farmers themselves are concerned that some persons who received must have received because of their perceived political affiliation to the National Democratic Congress. Mr. Speaker, even in Carriacou, farmers have complained about the distribution of the black tank. Mr. Speaker, the member know the reaction of farmers in the meeting that was held in Carriacou. The disappointment, the anger, not just disappointment, the anger. Some left the meeting, Mr. Speaker, and most of it had to do, Mr. Speaker, with the way that the distribution post-burial took place. Farmers are concerned. They've expressed it in the newspaper, they've expressed it on various programs. Listen to them, listen to them. Many farmers, how many months now since the passage of Hurricane Beryl? Imagine farmers are still complaining they have not received. You met a pregnant treasury. You got $118 million in CRIF payout. You say that you generated over $1 billion in CBI revenue. Why, Mr. Speaker? Why is it that you can increase and overspend in certain areas, but the farmers are still begging for grants and support? As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, I would have thought that the CRIF payout that came 14 days after the passage of this hurricane would have been used primarily for that purpose. Get them back, get them going. We need food. Mr. Speaker, it's a crisis. I don't know if we understand in this. It's a crisis that we are facing. While many who are not farmers, as I said, benefited simply because of their political affiliation. But you can understand why. It's clearer now. Some fisher folks are still waiting. Mr. Speaker, what has happened and what do we plan to do, Mr. Speaker, at this stage? We understand the pain of farmers and fishermen and why they have been demonstrating such frustration. But their cries seem to fall on deaf ears. Mr. Speaker, as the young people would say, we have to stop that. We have to stop that. We cannot continue to treat our farmers and fishermen in that way. Infrastructural development. Mr. Speaker, the public sector investment program is the lifeblood of the government's effort to drive economic growth and create jobs. Despite the administration's claim that this budget fosters economic expansion and employment opportunities, funding for infrastructural development has been slashed by $75 million. Somehow the words and the actions and the figures are not matching. How does reducing funding for the Ministry of Works encourage economic growth? Looking back, I have to say that this government should really, seriously now, this is no politics, should really extend gratitude to the previous administration. Mr. Speaker, as they have not been able to initiate not one major project, new major project, in almost 3 years, you must be very appreciative of the previous government. Mr. Speaker, it almost appears to me as if the government is deliberately keeping projects in the pipeline to help protect their image and to disguise their non-performance. I have to conclude that. Why are they being kept in the pipeline? So I'm curious to know, after almost 3 years, Mr. Speaker, when will these projects come out of the pipeline? I am not going to pull a pipe now to demonstrate anything, but consider these projects, Mr. Speaker. Where some preliminary or advanced actions were taken under the NNP administration, and they were catered for in the 2022 budget, when will they come out of the pipeline? In almost 3 years, Mr. Speaker, this government cannot justify the progress they've made or the lack of progress made under any of these projects, since they claim the title as the government with the record for mobilization, implementation, and transformation. Some of these projects, Mr. Speaker, are still at groundbreaking stage after almost 3 years. Some of them, the ground has not even broken yet. So, Mr. Speaker, let's look at some of those projects that I'm referring to right now. As I said, they were either in 2022 budget or they were at some stage of implementation in 2022. Florida Government School Project, St. Andrew's Anglican Primary School, St. David's Catholic Secondary School, Grenada Christian Academy, Seamoon Cultural Center, Marinet Project, St. John's River Project, Lighting of the Stadium, Grove Ministry Project, the National Aquatic Facility, National Health Insurance, Carlton House Project, Morris Bishop International Airport Expansion, Western Main Road Project, the Cliff Project, the new fire station. Mr. Speaker, should I go on? Oh, we've gotten the point. Mr. Speaker, after almost 3 years, this government continues to run on NNP fuel. The only notable thing about some of these projects, Mr. Speaker, apart from the lengthy delay, is the astronomical cost of overruns and debt to the state of this country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, who is providing leadership and oversight on these projects? NP has been there for 23 years. Enough of that. Almost 3 years, get down to work. Get the work done, Mr. Speaker. I got the impression in 2022 that MIT had the magic formula for the unclogging of the pipeline in record-breaking time. But it appears, Mr. Speaker, it appears the original role of this ministry is changing daily. Mr. Speaker, the numbers tell a story that contradicts the catchy slogans, contradicts the Facebook posting, and the broken promises. Mr. Speaker, even the Prime Minister publicly admitted his disappointment in the progress of many of these projects. The only problem, Mr. Speaker, with this is that the Prime Minister is admitting disappointment with himself too, because he's the Minister for Infrastructure. And not just the snail pace at which MIT is moving, but infrastructure must take responsibility. Mr. Speaker, and let us not listen to the next excuse of the minister that he was busy. That was one of the excuses I heard. He was very busy with the Build Back Better houses. He was very busy in Carriacou, Mr. Speaker. Not one, let me remind you, not one Build Back Better house was handed over by December. The 100 that were promised, mouth open and word jump out. The minister said from September, this is what was said, and I could only go with this, Mr. Speaker. We will build 80 houses per month. We, mathematically speaking, and let us say that's 480 homes already built. Then we were told, Mr. Speaker, 50 by December. No, let's say 100 by December. That's what we were told. Somewhere in my head, I have 100. Well, it appears that they're still in the minister's head. Mr. Speaker, do we understand the value? This is not joking matter. Do we understand the value of proper planning? The value of strategic planning in government? Not just jumping up and decide out of your head how many houses could be built within 3 months or within a month. Mr. Speaker, how can we begin to take this government serious? How can we even take this budget serious, this budget document serious? Look at the numbers. We can't. Mr. Speaker, in the presentation on Friday, speaking about the slow implementation rate and the transformation vision. And I noticed, Mr. Speaker, when he spoke about the transformation vision, he got very quiet, very, I'm sitting here, I could have hardly heard him. Mr. Speaker, the minister said, and I quote, so what I just said is supported by the minister, He said several long-stalled World Bank programs have been transferred to the Ministry of MIT to remove bottleneck and accelerate implementation. So now you know what I just said is accurate. The minister himself said that. The result thus far has been extremely promising. See, we're fed up with promises. So don't tell us it's extremely promising because we're going to interpret that in a particular way. Demonstrating the effectiveness of this strategic approach. Well, Mr. Speaker, how do you define strategic approach? Anyways, let me just make the point that when the supplementary budget was taken before this House, that was in March 2024, it was clear that some capital projects could not be accomplished based on the timeline. But I guess for PR purposes, Mr. Speaker, it was necessary to call out a long list of projects that would be completed between March and December. Mr. Speaker, we are again experiencing a similar situation, mark my words, that will have the similar or same results as the supplementary budget in March. Mr. Speaker, it may have been more effective to just suspend PR for a while. Put on paper what you know that you are able to do in 9 months. We're already in March. And that way, you might have even reduced the deficit that is before us today. Mr. Speaker, Grenada will be better off if this government would stop focusing on NNP, settle down, mind the business, and provide and produce and deliver for the people of this country. National security and crime are growing threat. Mr. Speaker, while this government identified national security as a key priority area for Budget 2025, the capital budget for the police has been reduced. There's an alarming and continuous exodus of senior police officers from the Royal Grenada Police Force. Let's look at the situation. Are we keeping count of the number of... It's interesting when you speak. It's very interesting when you choose to speak. Mr. Speaker, are we keeping count of the number of officers who have taken early retirement or have resigned, or how many have submitted application to leave? Mr. Speaker, exactly why the member reacted. You see, while some in political security circles have dismissed this, they call it an NNP purge. Mr. Speaker, based on their perception of political support, the reality is, and that is what I'm concerned about, not the politics, the reality. The reality is that most of these officers are highly experienced, well-trained, and at the very peak of their careers. Many of them, Mr. Speaker, never even supported NNP. They are just simply frustrated and disillusioned with the system. This is not a matter to be trivialized. This is not a matter to be trivialized. It is a direct threat to the national security, and everyone, regardless of their political affiliation, must be extremely concerned. This is national security. This is not a joke. Mr. Speaker, these experienced police officers play a crucial role in mentoring, training, and supervising younger police officers and recruits. Look around. Young recruits are being deployed with just weeks of training, having inadequate guidance and supervision. Mr. Speaker, I was at a function, I cringed when I saw a recently trained officer who was introduced to me as the head of the detail holding the gun, Mr. Speaker. I cringe. No one in that detail had more than a few months training for a major national activity. Mr. Speaker, we are facing a manpower crisis in law enforcement. There's a serious decline in policing standards due to inexperience and a surge in crime. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, the capital budget of the police was cut. Note, though, interestingly, that there's an allocation of over $28 million under the Prime Minister's watch that caters for security separate from the police. Do research on the areas where most of these deployments are made. And I'm not a security expert, but I'm sure every single person would conclude that most of these areas are what we would call low-risk areas. This is approximately, Mr. Speaker, 36% of the total amount for the Royal Grenada Police Force. So while our hotspots and our high-risk areas remain exposed, Mr. Speaker, help make sense of this, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when police can't respond to crime because of manpower issues, we are in a serious situation. What is our priority in this budget document saying about a response to this, about a proactive response to this? Mr. Speaker, does it make sense that the budget for overall overseas travel keeps increasing while the Coast Guard, which is supposed to protect already exposed borders, was denied gas for its engine because the government did not pay outstanding bills? Where is our priority, Mr. Speaker? When these factors are analyzed, a thinking person, or let's just say somebody who doesn't even think, will conclude that we are in a crisis with no strategic intervention or plans being considered. However, we should not expect any positive change if this administration continues to put square pegs in round hole for political expediency. Mr. Speaker, the solution is not simply to train more young recruits. That's the solution. It is not to buy longer guns, as the Prime Minister proposed. We need an urgent, serious, strategic approach to national security. What is this government's plan to tackle the rising crime and address the serious emerging threats that face our country today? There's a leadership crisis, a manpower crisis, and a rising crime situation. Combine these, Mr. Speaker, we have another ticking time bomb in this country. The government cannot continue to take a wait-and-see approach to national security. Far more support must be given to the RGPF. Good for the Pierre and raid to be moving along, great. But, Mr. Speaker, we need more support for the RGPF to proactively respond to the current internal and external threats to national security. 2 years ago, Mr. Speaker, a commitment was made to hold a national stakeholders consultation and develop a national crime plan. We were promised this by this administration. Where is the plan? Where is the policy? The urgency of this issue, Mr. Speaker, cannot be overstated. Grenada needs a clear, a decisive strategy to restore law and order, to address the issues that confront us. Let's not wait till it gets worse. Despite these challenges, Mr. Speaker, I wish to commend the officers of the Royal Grenada Police Force for their dedication. You deserve, Mr. Speaker, to be recognized. Amidst the fear, political victimization, police officers continue to sacrifice their lives in the line of duty to keep this country safe. The merit-based system is being thrown away by this government, and promotion appears to be an act based on emotions and political directions. Mr. Speaker, a nation cannot prosper if its people do not feel safe. What is the government really doing about the crime situation in Grenada? Grenadians deserve a peace of mind, not fear of crime. Mr. Speaker, pension. Mr. Speaker, the issue of public sector pension is quite intriguing. This government touting pension reform as an achievement is laughable, as this issue was not even a topic. Pension reform was not even a topic during its campaign. It was never. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's assurance that pensions would be paid had to do with the regular and continuous payment of the 1958 non-contributory pension to all workers, even if it meant borrowing. That is what the promise was. There is not a single worker in the public service who would not support this. What the workers did not appreciate, Mr. Speaker, was that the utterances was actually an exercise in deception. Mr. Speaker, this government touted the payment of retroactive pension based on the court ruling to 525 individuals as a significant achievement. Yet they have disenfranchised thousands of workers from benefiting from the said pension, as was expressed in the court ruling, through pension reform within less than 3 years of being in power. You go here, NMP has been there 23 years. We just there 3 years. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, you want to remind me what that bell means?
Yes, when the bell goes, it means that you have 10 minutes away from the expiration of your time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, lest we forget that the NMP in government, I probably should be asking for the extra time that the minister did not use it. Lest we forget that the NMP in government had extensive consultation with the social partners, including the union on pension and pension reform, commencing in 2017. An MOU was signed in 2018 for reform process. While efforts continued, negotiation with the union stalled, leading workers to seek legal recourse, which is their right, and protest, which is also their right, for the 1958 pension, as ruled by Justice Glasgow. At that time, Mr. Speaker, the NMP government was already paying pension to 2,200 individuals every month. Mr. Speaker, it is therefore unfortunate that some of the same workers who took to the street for the 1958 pension will not benefit from the 1958 pension that this government has promised. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister stood in the Parliament and said that the No Pension Act was a continuation of the work of the NMP. Mr. Speaker, we will not oppose pension reform. We never will, in principle. And indeed, we did a lot of work in this regard, no lie, that's true. However, Mr. Speaker, our proposal as it relates to pension and pension reform was far different to what the workers are faced with today. Today, workers are faced with a pension plan that forces them to deduct an additional 3 and 6% of their salary, while the NNP administration proposal had no additional deduction. Mr. Speaker, the NNP administration proposed 70% of the workers' last salary as pension, while today workers have no minimum percentage of their last salary as pension, but rather they can only withdraw what they would have saved. Mr. Speaker, under this current plan, a worker can outlive their savings, but a lifelong pension was guaranteed under the NNP proposal. Mr. Speaker, the NNP administration agreed to provide increases to pensioners consistent with the increases given to public officers. Today, under this new arrangement, this is not the case. I say clear case of leaving the bone and jumping behind the shadow. Mr. Speaker, the NNP administration is proud of its record of stakeholder engagement during this process and other facets of governance. This is how the MOU was developed and agreed upon through engagements and consultation with social partners. It is how we built fiscal infrastructure this government inherited and destroyed in almost 3 years. While consultation and discussions were sometimes contentious, very contentious, I say today it is healthy for a vibrant democracy. It is healthy. What we see today by this government is the stark contrast. People have no consultation. Mr. Speaker, there is an open attempt to stifle the voices of the people through economic starvation and bullying, be it in the media, social bloggers and commentators, workers who work in the public service, some over 19 years, the union, business people, even in this very parliament, you name it, all have felt the brunt of this unwarranted attacks. Mr. Speaker, it is concerning that some public officers are being called in or written to by PSC or permanent secretaries for attending political activities when they are within their constitutional right to so do. Mr. Speaker, the key word is some, because some officers are known supporters of the NDC. They are not called in. For example, Mr. Speaker, I have never seen a public officer heading a parliamentary electoral office actively participating in political activities. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure she was not called in. This is a cause for serious concern. Not that we care where she goes to or where she doesn't go. It is a cause for concern as it relates to the electoral process and the fairness of the electoral process, or perceived fairness. Mr. Speaker, I intend to write to the Governor General in this disturbing development if no serious action is taken, as it poses a serious threat for free and fair elections in Grenada. This is not about the individual, it is about the office that is supposed to be independent. Mr. Speaker, going back to pension, we have seen in recent times the Public Service Union, Public Workers Union, speaking out on this and other issues pertaining to workers' rights. We have also observed the attempt to dismantle this very institution that is older than the existence of the political party in office. Mr. Speaker, the unions are a key pillar of our democracy. That is why we had no problem, Mr. Speaker, with the contention that existed in some discussions between government and the union. And it is a sad day in the state of Grenada when we witness an open and flagrant attempt to destroy the union. Mr. Speaker, this is serious. Creative industry and investment, Mr. Speaker. The creative sector has the potential to be a major economic driver, yet we must ask, are we getting value for money? Are we getting value for money with the current investment made? Are investments in the creative industries cost-effective? The numbers suggest otherwise. Mr. Speaker, after extensive national consultation, a cultural policy was drafted to guide the growth and sustainability of this sector. To date, not a single aspect of this policy has been meaningfully implemented. How can we expect meaningful development with no strategic framework in place? The Office of the Creative Affairs, now term Office of the Creative Arts in the Budget 2025, was supposed to be the driving force for artists and musicians and designers and cultural entrepreneurs. Instead, its efforts are centralized and seems to benefit only a select few, leaving more talented individuals across Grenada wondering when an opportunity would come. Mr. Speaker, we all remember the Promise Unleash, a program that was marketed as a game changer for the creative industry in Grenada. It was supposed to revolutionize the creative space, but today many look forward to the promise for tangible results and clear direction. Many are disappointed. I know the total amount, Mr. Speaker. Approximately $1 million was spent on consultancies, contracts, and other services. No problem. But how much of this, Mr. Speaker, did the ordinary cultural artists and young creatives benefit from? Mr. Speaker, are we really serious or are we joking? Mr. Speaker, some low blows were pelt across the bow on the subject of information communication and technology from the Minister of Finance last Friday. Yeah. Last Friday, Mr. Speaker, the minister attacked the former Prime Minister, indicating that Grenada has nothing to show for serving as head of Carriacou and having responsibility for ICT, science and technology. Permit me to remind the incoming Minister for Science and Technology in Carriacou of some of the gains, just in case, during his stewardship, that he would have to give an update or he would have to share on progress over the years. Mr. Speaker, under the stewardship of Dr. the Right Honorable Keith Mitchell, Grenada made significant progress in this area. The liberalization of the telecommunication in the region was led by your very own. The multiple devices that some of you may have in your access right now because of this particular work done. The Caribbean Telecommunication Infrastructure Program, a program that secured $10 million to increase domestic broadband, Mr. Speaker. We have something to show. Mr. Speaker, based on the standing order, can I read additional 10 minutes to wrap up? I'm actually in the wrapping up stage right now.
You have 5 minutes to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, including submarine cable infrastructure and landing station, domestic backbone network and cross-border links, and national and regional internet exchange points in the region. Mr. Speaker, yes, we have something to show. Mr. Speaker, the establishment of a regional digital skills task force to promote awareness of the importance of digital skills in the region for economic and social development. Yes, we have something to show. Mr. Speaker, digital governance project that this government is unapologetic about listing in the very budget document. Mr. Speaker, these are some of the things that we have to show. The reduction in roaming charges for citizens in the Caribbean. I said travel throughout the Caribbean. That was another milestone under his leadership. Mr. Speaker, these are just some of the achievements. And I pray that the current minister would get an opportunity to do more. She can. Well, let's just last long enough to get at least some appreciation and commitment. You know, seriously. No, I'm serious when I extend best wishes. As I near the conclusion, and as I conclude, Mr. Speaker, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to Almighty God, whose divine providence has continually safeguarded, strengthened, and guided me, both in my personal life and throughout my public service journey. Mr. Speaker, my political journey has been made possible because of the unwavering love and support of so many. I offer my sincerest appreciation to my husband and our 3 children, their patience. I had 3 children during this political journey. Their patience, sacrifice, and constant love have been my anchor throughout these years. It has not always been easy for them, especially when I was required to prioritize the needs of this nation above their own. Yet, despite these challenges, they have shown great understanding and a commitment to the value of service and patriotism that I hold so dear. For their sacrifices, I am eternally grateful. I also want to express my profound appreciation to my colleagues for their steadfast support and commitment to this journey. I say special thank you. Words are not enough to express my appreciation to the people of St. Andrew South. And by extension, Mr. Speaker, the entire parish of St. Andrew, my heartfelt thank you. My gratitude is also extended to my dedicated staff over the years, members of Team Emma, and to all those who have offered their support and encouragement. The honor of representing you, I take very seriously. To the executive members and supporters of the New National Party, I am grateful for the trust you've placed in me to serve as your leader. I pledge to do all that I can to build upon the strong legacy of good governance, equal opportunity, and service for all. Mr. Speaker, to the people of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique, both at home and in the diaspora, you are the heartbeat of this nation. I give you my solemn pledge today that every day I will advocate for you. I will defend your interests, and I will work tirelessly to uphold the values of justice, fairness, and prosperity for all. Mr. Speaker, I wish to say, if you ask me how I conclude about this budget, I will conclude by saying I'm very disappointed in this budget that has been presented. This budget is obviously for a few, not for the people. All people deserve better. And so I will continue, Mr. Speaker, to advocate for their interests, ensuring that their voice is heard while pushing for real change, not hold up. Mr. Speaker, the members of my team will expand on some of the areas that I've touched on. Any area that I did not get to touch on, Mr. Speaker, they will continue in their presentation. And so, Mr. Speaker, it's left to say, special thank you to you for your accommodation this morning and your staff. And to say to all the members of this House, may we continue to serve in the interest of the people of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. Thank you.
Thank you very much,